Hello and welcome virtually to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Christopher Sands and I'm director of the Canada Institute. And together with my friend and colleague, Andrew Rudman, director of the Mexico Institute, we're very pleased to discuss today, or to bring together a discussion today of Mexico-Canada relations. And while ever since NAFTA, we've focused a lot on U.S. Mexico relations, on U.S. Canada relations, this third leg of the triangle has somehow escaped the attention that it was due. And we're very pleased because the occasion for this meeting is a meeting in Ottawa with leaders from the United States, Canada, and Mexico talking about the future of this very important part of our North American political relationship, diplomatic relationship, and economic relationship. Here to share their perspectives on where we are headed in Mexico-Canada relations are an all-star cast. First, we have Roberto Velasco Álvarez, who holds a Master of Public Policy degree from the University of Chicago, where he was the Chicago Policy Review's editor-in-chief, and has a Bachelor of Law degree from the Ibero-American University in Mexico City. He has experience in the Mexican federal, state, and local sector. After July 2018's presidential election, he was invited by the Secretary Designate of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, to support the transition process as a press liaison, and then served as Director General for Public Affairs and Director General for North America in the Secretariat for Foreign Affairs of Mexico, where he is now the Chief Officer for North America. Also joining us is Michael Grant, Assistant Deputy Minister for the Americas for Global Affairs Canada, Canadian Foreign Ministry. After starting his diplomatic career in 1994, he served in Serbia, Turkey, with additional responsibility for Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan, Argentina, Mexico, Libya as ambassador, and most recently as ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. In Ottawa, he's held various positions related to the Middle East, the G7, and international security in Global Affairs Canada and the Privy Council Office. He has been Director General for International Security Policy and at the Canadian Department of National Defence. And also with us is Rachel Poynter. Rachel is a career member of the Senior Executive Service and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for North America, covering the bilateral relationship with Mexico and Canada. She most recently served as Director of the Office of Policy Planning and Coordination in the Western Hemisphere Affairs Bureau of the State Department, where she coordinated the Bureau's work on regional and global issues, foreign assistance, planning in Latin America and the Caribbean, congressional affairs, and hemispheric strategy development. She's also previously served as Director of the Office for Mexican Affairs and Director for North American Affairs in the National Security Council staff. So it's a very impressive group. I don't want to slow this down at all, but let me start with you, Roberto, if that's all right. Oh, actually, no, Roberto, we are going to start with you, but I'm going to ask Andrew to ask the first question. Sorry about that. Power went to my head. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chris. And thanks to all our speakers for being here today. We're really happy to host you all virtually and take advantage of your presence in Ottawa. As Chris said, we'll start with you, Roberto. He mentioned, of course, that the Mexico-Canada leg of the North American relationship often receives less attention than the other two. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the Mexico-Canada bilateral relationship and how your visit to Ottawa this week fits into the overall relationship. Maybe if you'd like a little bit on the objectives of this visit.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And first of all, thank you, and also to Chris for the invitation, for this chance to discuss our vision for the region. It is certainly a momentous time after this pandemic, full of challenges, but also full of opportunities, as it happens with every crisis, and particularly in a time where the priorities of the three countries are so much aligned, as are the priorities of all the countries, and are mainly getting this pandemic under control, getting our economies back up and running, and of course, thinking about how we can be better prepared for events like this in the future. I am obviously, given this context, very happy to be in Ottawa for the first time as Chief Officer for North America. I have to say that we cannot overstate the importance of our relationship with Canada. We spend most of our time, I spend most of my time talking about the Mexico-U.S. Relationship. But Canada is also a very important partner of Mexico commercially, also in terms of social ties, also in terms of a shared vision of the North American region, and naturally also in terms of all the different things that we want to build together. I am pleased in that sense to see my friends Rachel Poynter and Michael Grant joining us at this panel, with whom I've had the pleasure to be working with for the past months and years. So I'm sure it's going to be a great discussion. The Mexico-Canada relationship, I would say, is based mainly on a principle of convergence and coincidence in this moment in time. We have similar values, and I think it's an interesting time in North America when we have three governments that are inspired in progressive principles that share the values of the importance of gender inclusion, of diversity, also of reconciliation with our indigenous peoples. So I think in this sense, with Canada particularly, we feel very comfortable and at a very good moment. We are working in a wide array of issues in the different institutions that we have, and I must say that something that is important to highlight of the Mexico-Canada relationship is the institutionalization of this relationship. I think for Mexico, it serves as a model of what we want to achieve in other bilateral relationships because of the different spaces that we've been able to build throughout the years. The high-level mobility and dialogue, also the Mexico-Canada alliance. So in that sense, I think it's, as I said, an idea of an architecture of a bilateral relationship that works very well, and that has a series of standards that help us to move through time and obviously through different administrations in the two countries. We also have a very important temporary workers program, which serves also as a model to think about migration. I think that's one of the most important points of the Canada-Mexico relationship, the temporary agricultural workers program that the two governments value so much, and that has all these mechanisms in place to protect the workers, to work between the two administrations and with companies to protect their rights and to guarantee that they have the best possible conditions, and obviously to take action when these conditions are not met and when there are violations to the rights. So I think this is something that we should take into account when we think about other programs of migration and other migrations to different parts of the world, and particularly within our region. We also obviously right now have the new USMCA, or I like how they call it in Canada, NAFTA 2.0. I think it's another great name for this trade partnership. And we have several mechanisms there that are starting to work. We have new provisions there that we will see how they work in the coming years. And we are excited to see how all this new framework allows us to integrate further the supply chains in the region and bring new elements to North America that are right now overseas, for example. Naturally, the pandemic also made us realize how important it is to think regionally when we are already so integrated economically. So the framework of the treaty and other spaces, for example, like NAPAPI, this dialogue that we have for influenza and other animal originated pandemics, will help us to think about possible disruptions to the supply chains and how we manage these disruptions. So these are some elements of what we have going on with the administration right now. Obviously, part of why I'm here is because there's a new cabinet. Canada just went through an election. We obviously have congratulated Prime Minister Trudeau for his victory, and we're eager to keep learning about the new priorities in this period. Obviously, the new members of the cabinet and the work programs that they will pursue. So hopefully that's what Michael and I will get done in the next few days. So I'll leave it there, Andrew, and please.
Excellent. Thanks, Roberto. I want to turn the very same question to you, Michael. You have a new government, you have a new minister in Global Affairs Canada, but I know some of these foreign policy issues are enduring and they aren't likely to change. How do you see the future of relations with Mexico from a Canadian perspective, and what do you hope to achieve with Roberto and his team?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the question, but let me thank Wilson Center for bringing us together. Always enjoy participating in your events, and the timing of this was so perfect with both Roberta and Rachel being in Canada. Let me say as well, I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. I love this question actually, because I am a deep supporter, fan of the Canada-Mexico relationship. I was posted to Mexico a while back, and really since then I've always followed it, even when I haven't been working specifically on the file. I think the way Andrew said it as the third leg of the triangle, I like to think of it as the third leg of a three-legged stool. And if it's not solid, the stool's not solid, but it's solid. It's very solid. And you know, we don't want to go back too far, but there's a great history of relations between Canada and Mexico. Even before NAFTA, and certainly before the new NAFTA, they were deep, but where they have gone over the last 30 years is really incredible. Roberto mentioned one of the most important aspects of a bilateral relationship, the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, which we think is a real model. We like it because it's really a win-win-win for employers, for workers, and really for our economies. They do a lot to protect workers' rights, get important work done, and really it's added such a tremendous aspect to our relationship. But going forward, I'm going to pick up on a few of the things that Roberta mentioned, and I really like the word convergence. There really is a convergence of principles. You know, we are, and I would include the United States in this category as well, we are countries that believe deeply in democracy and the respect for human rights. We believe deeply that there needs to be immediate and significant and sustained action on climate. We believe deeply that governments need to be working in progressive ways on such things as gender and the rights of Indigenous peoples. And we also, taking advantage of CUSMA, I actually like TEMEC. I like the way they say it in Mexico, to be honest. Taking advantage of that, we have a tremendous opportunity to turn what has been a real challenge for the world, the pandemic, into a great opportunity, as Roberto said. Our economies, our supply chains have never been more integrated than they are now. We are the most important economic bloc in the world. And we have a tremendous opportunity going forward. As we start to look at the lessons coming out of the pandemic, how do we ensure that those supply chains are even more resilient going forward? I think we have probably the most solid foundation in the world to build on. So we're quite excited about it. Let me just touch quickly on a couple of other issues. I mentioned democracy. I mentioned gender and the role of women and Indigenous rights. I think Canada and Mexico, given our deep history of working together, how we trust each other, I think working together, first and foremost in the hemisphere, we can do a lot. Looking at the hemisphere, I think we have to be honest, there are a number of areas that are in crisis of democracy, many places. And I think Canada and Mexico, and frankly, the United States, North America working arm in arm, we can both send a powerful message, and I think we can get a lot done. Because even though we're aligned, we're not identical. And we can complement each other's actions as we engage in the hemisphere in the world. And I think, look, there's a lot to be done bilaterally. Yes, we have great economic relations, but there is much more to be done. A lot of Canadian investment in Mexico. We'd like to see more Mexican investment in Canada. We want to see more trade, and there are important issues that we need to work on together. But I really think looking forward and leaning forward, we can work together in the hemisphere and in the world in some of these important issues that are facing all of humanity today. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. It's great. I really I think that aligned but not identical is a great way to think about this relationship. Let's now switch over to Rachel, if we could. Rachel, you're in Ottawa as well, so I think that suggests that Mexico and Canada are not, as you might say, meeting behind the U.S.'s back or conspiring or anything. But obviously, our neighbors, U.S. neighbors to north and south, have some shared concerns, perhaps vis-a-vis the U.S. and certainly, as was mentioned, their own bilateral issues. So I wonder if you could share just a little bit, sort of the U.S. perspective on the Mexico-Canada relationship, and how that bilateral relationship, the strong third leg, as Michael put it, of the stool, how does that fit into North America overall?
Thank you, Andrew. And truly thank you to the Wilson Center for the opportunity to be here. The timing of this event really is fortuitous, with both my travel to Ottawa here and that of Roberto, and really appreciate the warm reception from our Canadian colleagues. As both Michael and Roberto have said, this is a truly important moment for North America as we grapple with shared challenges, and we look forward to new opportunities. There is no doubt we have incredibly strong relationships with Mexico and with Canada. But I will note that a strengthened Mexico-Canada relationship is also important for the United States. The Biden administration is very focused on strengthening North American collaboration. And, I will build on what my colleagues have said. The climate crisis, unprecedented global migration, the ongoing effects of the pandemic, and security concerns, including the worsening opioid epidemic, are all bringing the interconnection between our three countries into sharp focus. President Biden's focus on the middle class is perfectly aligned with renewed attention to North America as we address these concerns together. And clearly, I think the best way to solve our most pressing problems is to work with our neighbors to the north and to the south. We have unique opportunities, and Roberto and Michael have mentioned these, to build back better together, including leveraging the USMCA or TMEC or NAFTA 2.0, whichever title we'd like to give it, as a mechanism for increased regional competitiveness. Clearly, the United States, Mexico, and Canada enjoy one of the world's most comprehensive trading relationships. Canada and Mexico are our top trading partners. And there is really a lot at stake in our shared economy, given the disruptions that we've seen during the pandemic. They have made working together essential to ensure resilient supply chains in strategic areas and to allow cross-border trade to continue. Truly in recognition of our integrated supply chains, we made sure cross-border trade continued during the pandemic. I think it's clear, that President Biden has said the United States will compete on the global stage from a position of strength. And domestically, we are increasing competition in a variety of sectors to give small and medium enterprises a better chance at recovering and building back better from the pandemic. And I truly see North America as an added point of strength. We really do have a number of strengths that we can leverage together: ingenuity, a rules-based trade regime, integrated supply chains, shared infrastructure, and strong cultural ties, just to name a few. So my trip here to Ottawa, including holding a trilateral meeting with Roberto and Michael this week, which I really look forward to, is an opportunity to focus on our shared interests and to discuss how we leverage those strengths. So really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today and look forward to the discussion on how to further enhance North American collaboration.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I want to say at this stage that if you're watching this event live or streaming, participating, you can ask questions of the speakers by sending them either by email to mexico@wilsoncenter.org or on Twitter to @Mexico-Institute, which is the Twitter handle of our Mexico Institute colleagues here at Wilson. If you're watching this live from Canada, I'll just remind you that we spell center the American way. So it's @Wilson Center ER, not RE. And then you'll be able to get your questions into us. But while we wait for some audience response, let me ask a question of all three of you regarding climate change. You know, we have the Glasgow COP26 talks coming up. This has been a priority for the Biden administration, certainly, and all three governments have been doing what they can to address climate issues. To what extent do you see potential for cooperation on climate and also renewable energy? And as we move towards net zero, I think a pledge that we're all hoping to reach. Roberto, can I go to you first, and then we'll follow the order of original presentation, go to Michael, and then to Rachel, if you'd like.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. Well, obviously, this is a topic that three governments care a lot about, as Michael mentioned. It must be a priority for the entire planet, given what science has been telling us now for decades on this really pressing topic, on how this is affecting our environment, not only for future generations, but presently. What we're seeing in large areas of Mexico, the United States and Canada, with droughts, with extreme temperatures, is obviously alarming and requires attention from the three governments. In the case of Mexico, we are experiencing, for example, in the north, the effects of this millennium drought that has been hitting a part of Mexico and a big part of the United States now for over 20 years, the millennium drought, and what this is causing, for example, in the California and Oregon forests. So it's certainly something that will require increasingly more and more of our attention. That's why we received just a few days ago Secretary John Kerry, the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change in Mexico. We had a very good meeting with a series of meetings with Secretary Kerry in Mexico City and Palenque in Chiapas. He had an opportunity to talk with President López Obrador, and we actually issued a joint declaration following this event, where we explained the intent of the two governments to increase our cooperation regarding climate change and obviously emissions of the carbon dioxide and other pollutants. Well, naturally, from the perspective of Mexico, it's important that this collaboration happens with a focus on energy independence. But we do see several areas of opportunity where we can work together. For example, in the case of short-lived pollutants, particularly methane, which is something that we've been working with Secretary Kerry's team, and where we believe there's significant space for North American collaboration. And we signed the methane pledge that President Biden proposed So we believe that's an area where we can do some things. Obviously, what President López Obrador has also been saying is that we have some important projects, for example, regarding hydro electricity. So we will also be exploring what opportunities exist for collaboration in these modernization projects that CFE is launching for our energy or electricity sector. And naturally, I think this area will be and has to be one of the big areas of the new North American agenda that the three countries are trying to build. So I'll leave it there, Chris, and give my colleagues Rachel and Michael so an opportunity to tell their part.
Excellent. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Chris. Before I go, because we're on climate change and Roberto mentioned some of the challenges we're facing with droughts and fires, you know, if you were to ask an average Canadian, you know, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Mexico? These days, most Canadians would say firefighters, which is kind of interesting. It wasn't the case a decade ago. The support that Mexico has given to Canada when we have been in need has just been incredible. And it's happened for years, of course, with the U.S. in many areas, but you know, this is a real benefit of the closeness that we've become. We can rely on each other in such challenging times. I think Roberto mentioned, you know, some of the initiatives that have been undertaken in terms of, you know, addressing climate change. We've also joined the methane pledge. We've recently doubled our funding to climate for the next 5 years. And we are looking forward to Glasgow, COP26, as an opportunity for the world to really come together and up our ambition level. And I think that's what you'll be seeing from Canada. In North America, I really like the way Roberto put it in terms of opportunities for collaboration. We couldn't agree more. I think taken together, there are incredible companies in all three countries who are working on renewable energy. I know in Mexico, for instance, there's somewhere around $9 billion of Canadian investment in Mexican energy, 4 billion of which is in renewables. You know, this is where we have expertise, where we can do more. And I think ensuring that, you know, those investments can go ahead and that there's more out there is really a top priority. So I like the idea very much of looking at the challenges of climate, the need to act and to act now, but also looking at it as an opportunity for our integrated economies is exactly the way to go. Thanks.
Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. I will add to what Roberto and Michael have so accurately captured. Climate change is the epitome of a challenge that knows no borders. It is absolutely an issue that demonstrates the importance of North American collaboration. And both Michael and Roberto have talked about some of those shared resources and opportunities that exist in terms of collaboration on the North America front. I also, you know, absolutely agree that COP26 in Glasgow is a pivotal moment at the start of a, you know, really decisive decade of action to tackle the climate crisis, and really applaud Canada's commitments there and their leadership to ensure a delivery plan for the collective pledge of $100 billion toward climate finance to support developing country needs. And I also want to echo Roberto's comments related to Special Envoy Kerry's trip recently to Mexico, where there was a really good full conversation on opportunities for collaboration. And, you know, note that joint statement that was released that captures our shared commitment with Mexico on climate action and opportunities for cooperation to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy in Mexico. Thank you.
Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody. I couldn't unmute myself. Usually, everybody has the opposite problem. So let's switch gears a little bit and focus on another topic that you all mentioned in your opening comments. And one of the challenges that face not only the 3 North American governments, but really all the governments in the hemisphere, which is migration and the movement of people. We've all seen the movement of Venezuelans moving in huge numbers to Colombia and around the hemisphere. Not long ago, pictures of 10 or so thousand Haitians on the U.S. Mexico border who had traveled from as far south as Chile and Brazil, where they'd been for a decade. Mexico also has over 100,000 internally displaced persons. So maybe you could elaborate, maybe I'll start with you, Michael, on how the 3 North American governments could collaborate, including with other governments in the hemisphere, to try to develop some long-term solutions to the challenge posed by the movement of people.
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's a really great question. And I think when you look at the issue of migration and certainly of flows of refugees, I think you really have to first look at the root causes. And there are several, in our region. We do have a crisis of democracy in several countries. And it's not just, the big picture democracy of elections that perhaps are not free and fair and whatnot. It's also, we have instances of corruption that have become endemic and need to be addressed. It's also simple issues of proper governance. And sometimes that's a little boring to talk about, but a well-functioning society is built on a well-functioning, boring public service. And I think that is a key element. But there are other issues as well: inequality, economic development, education. So those are areas where I think all of us are already working on. And perhaps, with a bit of a reinvigorated North America, we can look at where can we collaborate together on some of those issues. I think there's a lot of willingness from all 3 countries. When it comes to the actual flows of people on the move, from a Canadian perspective, I think what we can bring to the table is we have Canadians are kind of modest, but I think one thing that we do fairly well is migration. We have a long history of managed migration. And I think there are some lessons learned. Every country is different, of course, but I do think that is something that Canada can share. And it is something we're doing. Canada is currently chairing a regional platform in Central America, which came out of the Global Compact on Migration. The acronym is called MERPS in Spanish. I can never remember the proper name for it, but we are now chairing it. We took over from Spain, and it's a platform to allow countries to share best practices, to advocate and to engage with those key decision makers. I think we can also, from a Canadian perspective and working with the United States and Mexico, see what we can do more bilaterally with those countries that really need to improve their ability to manage migration. We have to, and when I say manage migration, I mean regular migration. I think it is an area where we can bring something to that collective table. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Maybe I'll go now to you, Rachel, if you want to share some thoughts.
I'm happy to. I'd say a lasting solution to effectively and sustainably reduce irregular migration in, from, and through the region requires a comprehensive approach that addresses both the acute and long-term drivers of irregular migration, as Michael stated. This involves absolutely looking at the root causes, and that is why the President's executive order on migration management really focuses on both a root causes strategy as well as a collaborative migration management strategy for handling the flow of migrants moving through the hemisphere. We're working with governments, with civil society, with the private sector, and with international humanitarian partners to effectively manage regional migration, but also to increase access to protection and to catalyze structural change to root out corruption, like Michael indicated, to bolster good governance, to improve security, and finally to increase economic opportunity. I have to note that Mexico has been such a strategic and a reliable partner for the United States in managing migration issues humanely and providing protection for those fleeing persecution. And Mexico's leadership in the region to provide a viable option for people in need of international protection really is critical. We're clearly working jointly to ensure humanitarian considerations from a central pillar that those form a central pillar of migration policy, humanitarian considerations, while we also deepen that cooperation to address the root causes in the countries of origin. So I really take to heart Michael's comments in terms of where there is a possibility for North American collaboration in that space. One example in terms of what we've done with Mexico, and clearly I'll defer to Roberto for parts of this, but is to sign a memorandum of understanding to establish a partnership to address lack of economic opportunities in Northern Central America, and to foster, to work together to foster agricultural development and youth empowerment programs in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Clearly, the United States and Canada have also further strengthened coordination to address forced displacement and humanitarian and protection needs in the region, and really applaud Canada's leadership in the MERPS and its role in the support platform chair. But truly looking at where we can work in the North American space to promote regular migration pathways and build capacity for national protection systems, as well as increased humanitarian support. I'll end there because I want to give Roberto time to talk.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. And let's definitely go over to you, Roberto, for your thoughts on this topic.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I very much like all the points that were laid out by Michael and Rachel. In the case of Mexico and the United States, this is obviously a time that we devote a lot of attention and energy to trying to tackle. And I think something that the two countries are very much excited and hopeful about is to see Canada approaching also this topic with their experience and engaging regionally, as we saw last week in Colombia, where we had a very significant meeting on this topic. And I say very significant because I can't remember any other meeting on migration in this hemisphere where we had such a diverse participation, a meeting that involved not only the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, who are mainly involved in migration, but also the United States, Canada, and Mexico, who are also countries that are receiving migrants, and in the case of Mexico and the U.S. also transit countries. So that is certainly something that we view very favorably, and hopefully we will get more opportunities to engage with Canada on this issue. I would just say that there are 3 or 4 areas of cooperation from our perspective, and I'm simply trying to recap what Michael and Rachel said. And I think we are working in many of these fronts, but I'll try to give some ideas of how we can engage further. On root causes, I think what Rachel mentioned, this memorandum of understanding that we signed during Vice President Harris' visit to Mexico, is certainly something or an area where we could get a lot of more engagement from Canada. We are doing a lot of technical level work. So I think there's a big opportunity to get the Canadian agencies involved in these talks and see how we can find paths to collaborate in Central America and in other regions. Secondly, Rachel mentioned the humanitarian protection side. And I would say another big area of coincidence of the 3 countries right now is that we all believe in the multilateral rules-based international system. We believe in multilateral organizations, and we support these organizations. And on migration, there are some very important organizations like the IOM, the UNHCR, UNICEF, and I think there's an opportunity also to keep engaging and discussing new ways in which we can support these organizations that do a very important work in terms of migration management in a region. Thirdly, I think what I mentioned at the beginning, like the Colombia meeting, to keep engaging and finding opportunities and ways to have a regional vision of migration and to have regional ways in which we can manage migration is certainly something super important. We started this process, I believe, a few months ago in Costa Rica. It was a good meeting, but it did not include Canada. So I think we are now in even a better place with Canada participating in Bogota. So I think we need to keep furthering these discussions and finding ways in which we can try to build a minimum framework or a minimum vision of migration in the Americas, because certainly this is not an issue that a single country can solve. This is not an issue where any country has a magical wand where we can simply, get this issue under control. The reality is that we're talking about the movements of millions of families, children, people in general, and we will need a lot of good faith efforts from all the countries in the region. We will need a lot of creativity, a lot of ingenuity, and we can only do this if many countries participate. And then the last part, and I certainly agree with Michael on this, Canada certainly has a migration system that has tackled one of the most important topics that exist on migration, which are the legal pathways for migration. Throughout the history of humankind, the reality is that the people move. We have human mobility throughout the entire planet. That's how we populated all the continents on Earth, even islands that are as remote as Australia. I mean, the fact is that we move around, we populate new spaces, and people do so in good faith because they want to improve their conditions of life, but also because they want to reunite with their families, or simply because they want to move. So I don't think we will get to a point where we can get rid of migration ever. What we should aspire to is to have a better management of these migratory movements, to have migration that is regular, safe, and orderly. And I do agree with Michael that there's a lot that we can learn from Canada in this sense, that certainly from the three countries in North America is the one that has most experience creating these legal pathways for people to go to come here to Canada and to look for opportunities here and to engage positively with society and to integrate with the Canadian society. So I certainly look forward to keeping these discussions, and I'm sure that both Mexico and the United States will benefit from this experience and these best practices that Canada can share with us.
Roberto, that was excellent. And let me sum up several questions that we have from our viewing audience related to the border. No one expected going into COVID, we didn't expect COVID, but no one expected such a dramatic and long-term disruption of normal border traffic. We did allow essential traffic to continue, very important for the economy, but it did disrupt a lot of individual lives, particularly border communities where the option to fly across the border wasn't as readily available. So to sum up several of these questions, first, I'd like to ask how you look at this experience of the closed border? And in particular, Roberto, I think in your opening remarks, you mentioned the North American Plan for Animal and Pandemic Influenza using the acronym NAPAPI. I've learned this myself. It's very catchy, but NAPAPI had a 2007 origin as part of the Security and Prosperity Partnership for North America that reflected Canada's experience with SARS. And then later, the 2012 version, which I think, Rachel, you may have had a hand in, was an update based on the experience with H1N1. And both of those focus on air, but the land border, while mentioned, was just sort of sketched that this could be a tool. Looking back, how do you see this experience? What would you do differently, perhaps, if you could update NAPAPI again, which I hope we'll see? And what can we do to try to heal some of the effects of this on the border? I'm going to turn this to you, Rachel, first, because you haven't had a chance to get a question first. So there you are.
Thank you very much. I'm going to reveal my age here, which is that I was around for the original discussions of the creation of the 2007 NAPAPI, North American Plan for Avian and Pandemic Influenza. We first implemented that plan during the H1N1 pandemic. And so after 2009, we then, spent the next year or two looking at and analyzing what worked and what didn't, and subsequently updated. So, I believe that there is a perfect opportunity here to really analyze and look from our experience over the last 18 months to 2 years, as we move forward in these conversations, what is it that we might have done differently? What is it that we need to look at and update? And certainly, the notion to me makes sense of perhaps expanding this clearly to all infectious disease. And then again, really using the lessons learned and what the three countries and our publics went through and are still going through to make sure that we have an update that really works for North America. I think we're perfectly timed to do that.
Roberto, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, I could sum up what I feel the three countries need to keep doing in this in one word, which is flexibility. The reality is that, for example, in the case of NAPAPI, from our perspective, what NAPAPI lacked was a little bit more flexibility to include a pandemic that was certainly very different from the original purpose of the group, which, as Rachel very correctly explained, was an influenza originated pandemic, the flu originated pandemic, which was H1N1. In this case, we had a very different virus that we didn't know a lot about, which is very different than the case with the flu that we have been studying for a long time since it first appeared, and where we have vaccines and treatments, and we have a lot of capabilities to deal with this issue. We have a lot of countermeasures in place to help us deal with this. But in the case of this COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2, we didn't have experience. We didn't have much knowledge of the virus. We didn't know what the disease could do. I'm gonna even tell a personal story. I got sick at the beginning of the pandemic on May of last year, the first days of May, and my main concern, and the concern of the people around me who very lovingly wrote to me and were asking how I was what is going on? What is going to happen? I didn't know. It was, we all learned about the pandemic and the disease as we moved through it, as we moved through this very difficult experience. So I think in the case of NAPAPI and in the case of border measures, the main lesson that we got is that we will need a lot of flexibility to deal not only with the issues that we know about and the emergencies that we know about, but also with the emergencies and the pandemics and the other problems that we don't really know about. And I'm gonna contradict you a little bit, Chris. this is not something just in the past. The reality is that this pandemic is not over. We still don't know exactly how this is going to end. So we will need to keep talking and engaging and figuring out ways to have a safe economic recovery, to have safe mobility. We can use the framework of NAPAPI. If we update it and we give it more flexibility, we can create new frameworks. We can learn a lot from the experiences that we've had dealing with the border in this period. But in any case, I think we would need a lot of flexibility in these different spaces, so we can really confront this very complex challenge and the challenges of the future.
Thanks, Roberto, and you're quite right. We aren't out of the woods on this yet. Michael, what are your thoughts on the border and how that is being operated now?
Yeah, just quickly, because I really like what Roberto and Rachel said. I think even though we haven't really got deep into the lessons learned yet, we have learned a lot. And I think when it's all said and done, one thing is going to be that we did an impressive job of keeping our economies operating by keeping our borders operating. That was a pretty challenging environment, and I think it worked really, really well. Another lesson that we've already learned, and we will need to look at going forward, is how do we build our resilience as North America? And that really gets to a lot of the supply chain issues that we've touched on already. You know, how do we ensure that we are self-sufficient? How do we ensure that we have deepened our supply chains amongst ourselves so that we're better prepared in the future? And then just last comment, I think you have three governments that very much believe in science and believe that decisions on such a crisis have to be driven by science. And I think with that understanding, there is a lot that we can do together. Yeah, NAPAPI may have had its shortcomings, but it certainly provided a strong basis of engagement. And I think now is a great time to start looking at how do we make that stronger for the future.
Thanks, Michael and Rachel and Roberto for those comments. I think the question of pandemic preparedness and lessons learned is a topic we could probably fill an entire session on, and perhaps at some point we will. But as we move to the end, I'll just ask one final question. It is, of course, wonderful that you are meeting at your level and meet routinely at that level, but there is a lot of talk or a lot of questions about whether there will be a North American Leaders Summit sometime in the future, and if so, what might that focus on? So as we conclude this conversation and look forward, I'd love to hear from you, and maybe we'll start with you again, Roberto, on any thoughts or plans for an eventual NALS or North American Leaders Summit.
Well, this is exactly the question where I wanted to go last and not first. but thank you very much.
Do you want to pass and
no.
Come back?
I'll try to be very, very responsible with my answer, and obviously, Michael, Rachel, feel free to correct me. This is naturally an ongoing conversation, and what I'd say is that these very conversations sort of gives us a roadmap of what could be some of the areas for an eventual North American Leaders Summit. We spoke about migration, we spoke about economic recovery, about COVID-19 recovery, about supply chain resilience, and in general preparedness of our supply chains and our regional trade. And we also spoke about all the different values, which as the conversation happened, I felt that there are even more than I first thought, as we started saying that we share the values of inclusion and diversity. But then, for example, I mentioned the multilateral commitment of 3 countries. And then Michael mentioned another one that is very important, which is this belief in science And we also all talked about this belief that we need to do something about climate change. So I think all those topics give us a framework of where these conversations could happen, or around what topics.
Okay, and we'll go to Rachel next.
I think Roberto very eloquently summarized the conversation, and absolutely some of these strong areas that we all identified for collaboration, and really welcome Roberto's comments on the regional migration conference that we just saw last week in Bogota that Secretary Blinken went to. I know Roberto was there, and really feel strongly that there's, as we talked about today, an opportunity for North America to engage in the context of those regional, commitments and the notion of looking at how we address the problem regionally. There's a role for North America here, so this is a really timely conversation. I echo that. The notion of looking at supply chain resilience and really in the context of competitiveness for North America, and clearly pandemic, both recovery but also preparedness are items that we talked about today, and all of those make perfect sense. In addition to looking at the climate crisis and how North America should be engaged on that issue. So again, a very timely conversation, and thank you all very much. And in terms of the timing of a meeting, I don't think any of us can really speak to that with any authority, but certainly I think it's incredibly important for all of us to be engaging right now, all three governments, on where we see those synergies for North America and government to government collaboration.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And in fairness to all, I don't think we expected any of you were going to make an announcement today, but Michael, we'll go to you to respond on NALS, and I think we'll have to conclude there.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think you were looking for a scoop actually, but you're not going to get it. No, look, engaging trilaterally is a priority, I think, for all of us. I think that's a pretty clear message that you're hearing in the bilateral Canada-U.S. roadmap between leaders. NALS is mentioned as something. So look, I think we are doing a lot of thinking and a lot of discussing on that. So watch this space. In terms of the issues, I have nothing really to add. I think economic recovery, building on our resoundingly successful integrated economies, is going to be at the top of the list as well. I believe climate, and I think Roberto's right. I think a conversation amongst the three leaders will touch on hemispheric issues and migration. And I really believe in this collaboration of these three close countries in the hemisphere and in the world. We can send, and again, we're not identical, we're complementary, we bring different things to the table, but working together, we can be a very powerful voice and a very powerful implementer. So looking forward to doing more. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Michael. And I think we are pretty much at time. So I think I will go ahead and thank all of you, Roberto Velasco, Michael Grant, Rachel Poynter, for joining us today. Thanks to my colleague, Chris Sands, and to the Mexico and Canada Institute teams who helped put this together. And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. We hope you found it to be a useful conversation. I know I have, and I believe Chris has as well. So thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.